only record those of us who are unmuted and talking. So you will not be recorded for posterity. Don't worry about that. But please do, if you want to comment on anything you hear or say hello, just use the chat function for that. And then last of all, before we get started, just a thank you, all of you, for your continued love and support for your independent bookstores and other small businesses. It's been a hard, long year, but we're still here, and that is thanks to all of you. So thank you so much for being here tonight. Thank you for shopping with us and shopping local. And without further ado, David is going to introduce our guest this evening.
Well, thanks so much, Rachel. I had big plans for April 2020. We were going to have a big group poetry event with at least 3 of the poets that are here tonight. But of course, things didn't work out that way. In fact, I remember clearly the very first event that was canceled, and with more hand-wringing and emotion than any of the other events, was Reuben Jackson's, who's here with us tonight. So I'm very glad to welcome you all to this special Northshire Bookstore celebration of Poetry Month with these 5 guests. Our first guest tonight is an old friend, Sydney Lea. He was the Poet Laureate of Vermont from 2011 to 2015. His most recent collection of poetry, his 13th, Here, was published in 2019. His 14th volume, Suspension, will be coming soon, but next month, his new book about poetry, Seen from All Sides, Lyric and Everyday Life, will be published. You can pre-order in the link in the chat. Please join me in welcoming Sydney Lea.
All right.
Am I unmuted, David?
Yes,
Yep.
you are. Go for it.
Oh, I am. Well, thanks, people, for showing up and abiding with my the techno-Neanderthal inclinations. It's good to see you all, and I'm pleased. Some of you I don't know. One person I haven't seen for a long, long time. Reuben, I don't really know, but I've had some back and forth with him and have great respect for him, so I'm delighted to share the time with him. I'll read a few poems, mostly from that last volume called Here, but I'll read maybe 1 or 2 from the forthcoming volume. I was trying to select these. I thought of my old late friend Bill Matthews, who once said, affectionately, I hope, he said that most of my poems could be summed up in a line from the Teddy Dare's Picnic. If you go down to the woods, you're in for a big surprise. Well, anyway, be that as it may, in this case, I started on the water at any rate. It's called Fire and Jewel. 80-foot hemlock, spruce, fir, pine. They kept lifting off their stumps like so many rockets, smoke trails and all. And I beheld the fire-crossed lake from where I drifted. I'd been beating the water for baths when my eyes were lifted. 50 years later, I still recall my thoughts and how I thought that to think them was more than odd. I felt glad I had the faculties to notice the hill's astonishing orange heat as it flared to white with each explosion. Then the whole of the conflagration bending toward earth, a horizontal wall, a monolith that somehow tore downhill in a sudden blast of wind. It was gorgeous. Several hours would pass before I knew the flames had sent Bo Tyson flying down Blake Cove Mountain on his skidder and into the lake by Stearns Island. He had to take the loss. It was that or burn. Donald Messier, wielding an axe in his turn with a makeshift crew, collapsed from labor and heat. Mason, the storekeeper, dragged him away. I knew Don, sadly, only a few more years. He and Bo and Mason. Good, honest men. I can't account for dreams like the one last night when I watched that fire again. Miles above in what seemed pure quiet, serene, the same jetliner crossed as years ago. The same scent rose, torch needles, caustic smoke. The same diabolic roar came on as I rocked in the same canoe, the waves still slapping its hull. In an hour, 5 decades back, the length of that ridgeline turned the color of onyx. My dear wife's latest birthday will soon be upon us. Is that why the dream passed smoothly into the next one? I saw precisely a beautiful onyx pendant hung on my beloved's breast from a chain. I never dreamed such a woman while that ridge blackened. Wouldn't meet her for years. Today, I drove to a jewelry shop and I was still dreaming. 300 miles to the west of Blake Cove Mountain, I bought the necklace and felt some fire in my being. Mild version of one that kindled in that old autumn and has, for a long time, underground, kept burning. I don't think this next poem needs any explanation. The story is contained within it. I think it is accessible. It's called The Owl and I. Once that half-assed cross got burned on our lawn, my mother took off back north to have me. My father was stationed in Gadsden, Alabama, before the Second Great War, commander of so-called colored troops. And he'd invited a few of his men inside the house, you see. A radical thing indeed just then in the Jim Crow heart of Dixie. So my mother escaped giving birth down there, though I don't have any idea why I'd think of this, which, near to her death, she spoke of so many years after. Why now, on watching a barred owl glide to a hemlock gone dark at sundown, everything else as well going dark around me here where I stand. Once at midnight, she thought she'd heard a whoop of human anguish and wondered whether some soldier were being lynched outside. My father went for a look but found nothing. My lifelong relationship with my mother was vexed, I now suspect, in part because between us two lay a lot in common. Jews were being crammed into cattle cars right then, but for Dad and those troops, the evil in Europe lay several months ahead. Still, real or imagined, that cry of mortal misery stuck with Mother. Though no signs of nearby violence turned up next morning, the company came en masse to mess. Shit on a shingle, as the GIs said, dried beef on toast. So life went on, at least for a while, more or less. It ought to bring comfort that I'm where I am, aging but safe, my clan constantly swelling as sons and daughters produce their sons and daughters, and winter so harsh this year, giving way at last to spring, with snowdrops glinting the freshets, making their evanescent cascades through the woods. I recall how Mother loved this season. I'm in this lonesome mood. It feels that I'm in some pitch black tunnel and won't get out again. That this, as the saying goes, is it. And all I'll have at the end, of course there can't be anything to it, is that sorrowful 8-note anthem of that single owl, the sound just now having reached my vexed old head, though I'd be foolish to think that song was addressed to anyone human. Here's a new poem, which is coming out fairly shortly in a wonderful online journal named Plume. If you don't know it, I find it's wonderfully eclectic and refreshing and interesting. This poem's called I Arrive at the Scene. All of a sudden, a crowd, most of us pretty much strangers, which seems to me, well, strange. Our village and others here in this stretch of valley are tiny. But John, who's been the chief of volunteer fire department for years, shows up exactly as the ambulance crew appears. I do know John. We live on the same back road. He's quiet and decent. He sees what we've seen, blood on the gravel to her, tangled up in the weeds. Roof down, that's her old crate in the brook. There's a gallon of milk in a bottle standing straight up on the tar. The glass didn't break. A miracle. I've heard someone say about our town, it's the place where all of us fight and all of us love our neighbor. Everything in her sack was strewed or squashed or smashed, except the jug of milk, which she bought at a neighborhood dairy. And that's why it came in glass, not a grocery store container, the waxy kind. One man thinks the woman came to his church a time or two, then stopped. The EMTs do something to her skull with a sort of sleeve made out of metal and cloth before they load her up. Does anyone know where she lives or lived? John shoots me a look, not good. She might have done better if she were made of glass. I know that's stupid. I'm thinking a bunch of ridiculous jabber, but I'm also thinking about my family, how bad things happen, not just to bad people. Of course, that lady is a stranger, so good or bad, who knows? I want to be asleep or learning to play the piano, or oiling the 3220 my uncle left to me, though it's not deer season. And besides, I don't hunt them in my old age. I wish I'd been doing something that wouldn't have let me arrive in the first place at what's here before me. Whatever it was, it would suit me. One of the things that I did early on in the lockdown was I wrote a series of poems entitled Animate Objects. And I just took things around the house and looked at them. And I wrote a poem about, an old metal clock or a faulty burner on a stove, whatever. This one is called Balloon and Flowers. I dropped into sleep while reading a book of poems by Goran Simic, my Bosnian friend. They're brilliant. Full of red flowers and graves and wrenching accounts of his homeland during the 90s. They lend some perspective to our COVID-19 scourge, which I don't mean to downplay, much less to discount in unforgivable part in worsening it of our leader, cretin and villain. Goran's a Serb and his wife was a Muslim woman. During the Troubles, he really had nowhere to turn. His poetry makes my guts knot. It's not a sort you'd think of as soporific, but being so anxious for 3 generations of family has made me restless almost each night. And so, of course, I was tired. I'd been sitting in my wife's dear grandfather's rocker, handsome but sternly wooden. Still, I nodded off. And when I came to, I noticed I had drooled on my shirt front like any old fool might do. And yet, the afternoon sunlight through the kitchen window turned even the spot of spittle to something lovely. Unlikely enough. And the next thing to snare my attention was a once vivid mum in a glass and a reddish balloon, left for my wondrous partner's 64th birthday, back before we knew what the world was in for, although that contemptible leader had been forewarned. Our grandchildren's eyes turned bright as my wife blew out the candles, the smaller kids batting balloons like that one up into the air. All that before some weeks unraveled and people got sick and many died, and that balloon and that flower, sole survivors, puckered and shrank to half their old sizes and somehow looked so sad that I went back, it makes no sense, I know, to those agonizing poems of plunder and murder. I probably used my allotment. Have I not? It's been 10 minutes. I forgot to notice. So I'll stop right there.
That was wonderful, Sid. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Really appreciate it. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Next up, Sarah Giragosian, a poet and critic in Schenectady, New York. She's the author of the award-winning volume Queer Fish and would have been joining in person for her latest book, The Death Spiral, which is available at a link in the chat. Please welcome to Northshire, Sarah Giragosian.
All right.
Thank you so much to my fellow readers, and thank you to Rachel and David for hosting this event. I'm so pleased to be here. So I will be reading from my new collection, The Death Spiral, which was published this past year by Black Lawrence Press. I wrote this book during the last 4 years when the political crises of our time was very much on my mind. The title poem, The Death Spiral, actually refers to a fitness test that's conducted among raptors, such as bald eagles, for example. What they do is they join talons mid-air, and to test the fitness of their mate, they fall from the sky, releasing talons often when they're very close to the earth. I mean, think of this as like the ultimate first date. So the conceit of the collection is about this kind of precarity that I experienced as a queer woman married to an immigrant, and the kinds of xenophobia and the racism and the sexism and homophobia that was coming out under our past administration. So I'll start by reading The Death Spiral. Suppose that to marry is to defy death, talon to talon, to promise to learn together the art of free falling as mutual deference. Suppose the law decrees your desire unruly, your body sylphs or outlaws, but call it sacrifice or symbiosis, you will be one. Suppose that, despite cartwheeling down an updraft of air to the upsurging details below, skyscraper, factory, tree, car, you study only the pale cream moons of her eyes, stricken below their hood, cincture of her wingspan, winds riffled, and the muscly clutch of her tendon sounding blood. Suppose that just before pavement hits your skulls, there's the ripening of a moment, a toehold in grace, when you both untangle, roll out of your death dance, and fall upwards in thrall of sky, backdrop of brambles, scrim of treetops. Suppose catastrophes averted for the moment, but always you'll be on the cusp of it. She, the thermals, and the warming skies are all you can be sure of. You'll preen on the moon if you must. And this next poem is called The Wasp Nest. I hear them in my dreams. Their wings beat at a frequency of sea, and out of spittle, wood, and song, they make a cathedral of papier mâché. It grows each hour, a Gothic fruit below the sweet birch, while they writhe in a fever of toil, laying comb upon comb, feeding their larvae, fine-tuning their hive, sounding their paean to female industry through the streets. When I approach, no, intrude, it is not pain that I crave, but something close to it. Her, the queen of meticulous care and fierce motherhood, whose madness is formalized and made into a fortress. I would be a pincushion to her stinger, but instead she clutches me as an eclipse. 6 little claws, 6 little legs. Pillars of wasps rise and fall away like gates when she comes. And when she coaxes me through, I will become her initiate, just as someday a hive of sleepers will pupate and rise from their combs, such formal cells, to form a new brood. There is venom here. I cannot forget it, but nothing reckless. There is pattern and her vision and life, a future in every nurtured crevice. I'll just read one more. I'm keeping an eye on the time here. So this is called Thirst in the, I always mispronounce it, the Chihuahuan Desert in Texas. And the epigraph is, such are the hidden uses of adversity, from Aldo Leopold's Sand County Almanac. Woozy from the sun, we go Thelma and Louising our way across the desert. Kingdom of desert spoon and shin dagger, cowboy hips bulked up with shotguns, and longhorns like brides of dust, waiting for a kiss of rain. We catch Coyote on her daily beat, tallying the days without. She's not quite hamstrung with hunger yet. She'll eat mesquite beans if it comes to that, but should rather flush jackrabbits out of snakeweed. Move on, gringos, she says, and we do. We're not hardwired for hardship the way she is. We weren't born under this hot, deadpan sky. You anchor me, fingertip at my knee. We're not prudent like the beryl cactus, built to store water and drought, or patient like the century plant that waits 15 years to bloom. We're fiery like the ocotillo in spring that rises from twisted spires to advertise clusters of exuberant red blooms, vivid slips of tongue to hummingbirds and carpenter bees. I try out the language of wooing in this parched land. Vertical means sun, beeline means let's go. Red means drink, traveler, drink the sudden lushness. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. That was great. Those are wonderful.
Woo, woo.
Fantastic. Next up, our next guest is Suzanne S Rancourt. an award-winning poet of Abenaki Huron descent. A multimodal artist and expressive arts therapist, she is the author of 3 books of poetry. Rachel will be posting a link to her book, Murmurs at the Gate, in the chat. Come join me in welcoming Suzanne Rancourt.
All right.
I'll read a little of this and that. First from Murmurs at the Gate. Ba-boom. At the crux of 4 chambers, there is enough stillness to move in any direction. A chambered round, fired downrange in a direction of passion or survival. What is action? I was just saying the other day how some assaults cause one person to disintegrate into wicked submission, and others rise with horrific glorification from the fields of shadows, burn as wild-fired stars, lightning bolts of steel, march regression into cavities of accountability, reload the heart with shells of bright integrity. Okay. Ghost nets. I was tall for 14 when the bombs dropped like spider bites along the shoreline. Our thatched huts and boats flew into pieces. Bone fragments, body parts, and humanity hurtled through the gossamer of politics. My father sat holding a few scraps of paper and photos that survived unscathed as miraculously as our own survival. Nothing moved, but the smoke and steam weaving between the stalks of blasted boat dock supports and dead fish. There was no one. Everything in that moment became ghosts, even us. I lost my mother, aunts, sisters, brothers, and most of my father. But we knew we would survive. We already had. It was the devastation that hollowed us like pigs prepped for roasting. My father stuffed himself with ghosts. My emptiness became a boat, and I fished for souls. I made nets to cast until I caught new dreams to live. And I'm gonna, this one is from the book that will be out in a month or 2. Actually, no, more like a week or 2. Tanning the hides with Sisyphus. I've worked in a lot of different places, so I worked in a tannery for a while. That's pretty gross, but anyway, just saying. Tanning the hides with Sisyphus. Staged on a platform, the hide trimmer, its 8-foot blades, a caricature of push lawnmowers, a rotational blur spun parallel to the stained rollers that wrung out chromide 6 wash. You were pedestaled away from the rest of us, elevated under the classic low-hanging high-wattage light bulb, the main attraction. In a brilliant aura of aldehyde wet white and chromium sulfate wet blue. Never distracted, you never spoke. Us others stirred penance, silent flesh in lagoon vats of pickling, wash, dyes, hides riddled with maggots hatched en route from New Zealand. Our clothing rotted, Arms, abdomens, shoulders bled of whatever color the hides were dyed that day. Working second shift was a blessing that cooled the stench and poison we consumed with each inhalation, each pore of flesh. Communal transgressions, a wedge of distance between the blatting of the butchered and every hide we cut, roughed and trimmed ragged excesses, gluttonous faux pas became piecework promotions, competitions that required 2 hands, 2 arms. We stacked hides on 10-foot seesaw trolleys, heaved teetering mounds of skin, skidded iron wheels across lime-pitted concrete, grunted with the wet of every 6-foot hide. Our flesh burned a Dantean caisson rolled into the drying room and blast ovens, where carcasses were stretched and toggled onto mural-sized mesh screens, stacked upright to accommodate the neat slip into an envelope of Scirocco until dry, stiff. Skins never stopped coming, vats never emptied, dead always floating, another trolley to be loaded, a rhythm to foot pedal released rollers and blades. I was new on the trimmer, a natural. Damn near made piecework my second night. 118 dozen creatures to your 200 plus. I wasn't even trying. Paychecks, paychecks. Was I your last stone? Final shove off that night? Mid-shift you shut down your trimmer, stood at the end of mine and said, my brother lost his arm last week on that machine. Your voice, chamois soft, you stood holding space with a pause of presence. You were done. You quit that night. Your statement a trickle of pebble. What you could not do for your brother, you did for me. Just 2 more short ones. Clean skin. The glass feeder swings in your absence. Sugared water mulled into soured mash. Even the red and black ants refuse to march into the fog of the fermented there in the backyard meadow. A stand of black wrought iron shepherd hooks lead nothing. Only heard the air, now vacant of your fervent muezzinic chatter and chirps, your high-pitched territorialism. There is a language that tears the meniscus of air close to the ear, eye, forehead, or temple. A shrieking buzz-like vibration accompanied by a speed of sound, screech, piercing the gelatinous viscosity of space, like an eye gouge with the violence of surprise. And when you are gone, when those who remain can still stand from their moment of frozen, the essence of flesh fabric shredded, you head south. I feed you no more. I wash the feeder, stack the wood, winter in, and pray for clean skin. And then one last one from Murmurs at the Gate. Fabric, The weaver has become the pattern, plaid, full of angles and predictabilities, and the shuttling of husbands, children, lovers wears her thin. There are two movements, past and future. The loose swatch of the present unravels, always in ballet fashion, dangles gracefully between flying and landing. There is a texture in love that needs to be felt, needs deft fingers to braid the over-under of self. Fingers that toe dance over warp and weft, that understand the rhythm of the loom, the tapestry, an arabesque of extended tones, both subtle and vibrant. With eyes closed, the clatter of shuttle and feet pumping the loom like a grand pipe organ resonating across threads, she remembers her last words to her first lover. Like worn denim, love me like that.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. It's really powerful. Our penultimate poet this evening is New England-based poet and educator Rage Hezekiah, a Cave Canem, Ragdale, and MacDowell Fellow. Rage's award-winning chapbook Unslakeable is only available at inside the Manchester store, but her full-length collection Stray Harbor is online and at that link that will be posted in the chat. Please join me in welcoming to Northshire once again Rage Hezekiah.
All right. Woo.
Hi, thank you all so much. Thanks David and Rachel for hosting, and thanks all the other readers. I'm grateful to be here. I'm going to start with a poem called Mercury in Cancer. Swallowtails hover above bee-balm. I think Ouroboros, all in balance. July again, warm fate of days edging towards September. The woodchuck unearths himself, decimates our heirloom tomatoes. I watch a brandywine plump and ripen. When I beckon my wife to the vine to show her what we've grown together, the creatures gnashed it open. Dark pink, writhing with earwigs. I'm forever unpregnant. Who could be fertile in this time of loss? I'm made to hate my own wanting. A couple summers ago, I had the fortune of being at a residency where I did kind of a deep dive into poems about my early sexuality. So this next poem is in that vein. Consent. I took him in my mouth at 14, braced for the jolt of hot liquid, acrid, unwelcome. I didn't learn consent until 23, fucking a woman who needed yes with every action, asking, can I touch you here? Is this okay? I learned possession of my body, the unexpected agency of pleasure. I was oblivious until she held me from the inside while I sobbed. Her mouth soft on my carpal. I bellowed deep and loud, howled a chasm, open as a peony.
Yeah.
When I was trying to place those poems in journals, I got a ton of rejection letters, which is totally normal. That happens every day. But this next one is a found poem that I created from all of the rejection letters, which felt totally relentless at that time. It's called Not For Us. We have carefully considered, we have decided against, we've decided not to accept, we decided not to take, we decided to pass. We're going to pass, we'll have to pass, we must pass, we regret, we must decline. We will not be taking, won't be taking, will not likely accept, we cannot accept, can't accept, are not accepting. We don't feel it is right, not cohesive enough, not quite suited, not quite right, not the right fit, not a fit, no, not now, didn't quite land, doesn't fit, don't fit, didn't feel quite right, just didn't fit right, isn't a good fit, didn't feel it, wasn't right, wasn't chosen, wasn't a fit, does not work, does not meet our needs, does not fit the needs, do not meet our current needs, best wishes. We wish you the best. We wish you luck, best of luck elsewhere.
Yes, yes, yes.
I tend to write, the ones that I write when I'm angry tend to end up being on the better end of poetry. This next poem is about anger. On anger. My white therapist calls it my edge. I hear angry Black woman. She says, strength of willful negative focus. She says, acerbic intellectual temperament. I copy her words onto an index card. She wants an origin story, a stranger with his hand inside me or worse. I'm without linear narrative and cannot sate her. We perform rituals on her living room floor. I burn letters brimming with resentments, watch the paper ember in the fireplace, admit I don't want to let this go. What if anger, my armor, is embedded in the marrow of who I am? Who can I learn to be without it? Wherever you go, there you are. She asks what I will lose if I surrender. I imagine a gutted fish, silvery skin gleaming, emptied of itself. And I'm just going to read one more. This is called Northern California. You stood at the edge of the stone fruit orchard while I scaled the ladder, a picking basket against my belly, brimming with shiny ripe plums. Father, you came to California, willing to farm at my side, practiced shattered Spanish with the men I'd befriended. When I left after lunch to get high, you never said a word about the workday. You let me be guiltless and young. On the weekend, we cruised the 101, ate green tea ice cream beneath eucalyptus, air salted sweet. We wandered Muir Beach in tranquil awe until surf chased us back toward the dunes, pants heavy wet, both laughing. Before you learned to swim and I learned black joy, we doubled over, taunting each crested broken wave, at play with an ancient tide, wide grins agleam in the sun. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Whew.
Thank you so much, Rage. That was great. I knew you'd be a good addition.
Yes. Yes.
All right, and
yes.
now it's with great pleasure that I finally get to introduce Reuben Jackson. After a long time, Reuben served as the curator of the Smithsonian's Duke Ellington collection for 20 years. He was the host of VPR's Friday Night Jazz from 2013 to 2018. An educator, mentor, archivist, music critic, librettist, Reuben's first volume of poetry was selected by Joseph Brodsky as the winner of the Columbia Book Award. His latest volume is Scattered Clouds, new and selected poems. Please join me in welcoming back to Vermont, Reuben Jackson.
Hello. Hello, everybody. It's good to be here. I'm listening to you all read and I'm thinking to myself, but now you'll know what I was thinking. I am so proud to be a poet, which is not something I would have said in 10th grade, sitting way in the back of the English class, writing sonnets to this woman with this perfect afro. But now you know everything. Okay, I'm going to start with a poem that's more recent, and the next two will be from Scattered Clouds, or when I'm being silly, I call it Scattered Clowns. But it has to do with Vermont. I'll just quickly say, Bernie Sanders was at the inauguration for our new president and vice president, and the hoopla with the mittens, and so people here in DC, Washington DC, where I live, always ask me questions about Vermont whenever Vermont is on the news. And so people would say things like, well, did you know Bernie Sanders? Or did you know the woman who made the mittens? And I said, well, actually, I do know the woman who made the mittens because I did some workshops in her after school program where she teaches. And people don't necessarily get the notion that I said, look, the state is a small town, but this poem stems out of my initial foray into Vermont. I went to Goddard College in 1975, 1978, and leave DC, which was like 75% Black. And it's when my counterculture persona, which Goddard was supposed to exemplify, meets this romantic desire from watching, a zillion MGM movies from back in the day. So this is called East Barry. The sales clerk claimed that the snowfall spoke with a Vermont accent. I only knew that the corduroys I bought from L.L. Bean had not been purchased in vain, and that here nobody fought for the last roll of toilet paper on an otherwise empty shelf. The latter was reason enough to call my southern kin, whose minds were likewise filled with central casting notions of the world above Boston. But the weather owned my eyes, like the gazebo at the foot of Main Street, where I wept waiting for Jimmy Stewart's ghost. And as promised or threatened, depending on how you look at it, these next poems are from Scattered Clouds, which came out October 2019, before the world fell in, but I got to get up to Vermont before then, some other places, and it's, well, I think Amiri Baraka said, let my poems be a graph of me, GRAPH, and I think they are in many ways. So this is called 1975, which is when I started school. Goddard, during last year, the year of lockdown, I heard from a former classmate, a person with whom I had my first slow dance, this was at Goddard as opposed to in the basement of my parents' house, pretending, somebody was Lieutenant Uhura from Star Trek or somebody was there. So this is a kind of a recollection of that. 1975. It was a long way to go for a party. 45 minutes from Canada, moon just above my right hand. It was winter. She was a school teacher who smelled of jasmine. Stevie Wonder sang Looking for Another Pure Love while Jeff Beck played gorgeous fills and solos. We danced as well as our cumbersome boots would allow. 1975 was a big year, away from home, 13 hours away up at Goddard. And, Goddard, Vermont's a little more diverse than it was then. In the 70s, if I saw another person of color, I'd call all my relatives and say, I saw a Black man in Montpelier, and this took place in East Montpelier, like the general store, C.P. Dudley's, which is still there. So this is April 1975. Should my Black Flatlander eyes lock on the other brother in the general store. The first black man I've seen since what seems like I can't count that high. Do I pretend I don't see other people pretending not to see us? Two brothers buying Triscuits and peanut butter respectfully is revolution on a Sunday afternoon. And the last piece from Scattered Clouds, just quickly, like my mother had a lot to do with my attending Goddard because my father wanted me to go to Notre Dame. And I mean, that's probably a book in and of itself, but she was a language arts teacher at DC Public Schools. She read poetry. She loved poetry. She played classical piano. And she wanted to be a print journalist. And, you know, I wrote for Downbeat and all these things. But she was born at a time when, you know, Black woman, it wasn't going to happen. But she's in me, as are both parents, obviously. But I was thinking about her when I wrote this, obviously. It's called My Mother in the Afterlife. It's 1970 again. My mother is shaking her head at the sight of my closing. She never abandoned her dream of a world without denim. Now there's no escaping her critique. You can't have coffee with God looking like that. She rolls her eyes at Abby Hoffman and at Bill, who owned the corner store near our house. Death has restored her mind. Now she's talking curfew. My brother laughs behind a cloud. So there you are. Thank you all again for inviting me. I'm glad I finally made it in some capacity, and hopefully, you know, down the line, I'm working on a new book, and you know the rest. Maybe we can.
Definitely, Reuben. Definitely in person. That's time.
Yes.
After all of this.
Yes.
I just want to thank you all so much. This has been a really delightful evening.
Yes.
What a joy. What a celebration of poetry, too.
I agree. Yes. Yes.
Well, everyone, take care. Have a great evening. Thank you again for coming. If you're interested, we've got more poetry on the schedule later this month, including Thursday of this week, and then at the end of the month, too. So have a great evening, everyone. Go off on verse.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you all. Thank you. Bye-bye.